Welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For our tutorial today, we're going to learn my original design, the Hathor ring. So you can use a standard coin bead. I've got a beautiful faceted labradorite here, or you can use quite a chunky, thick, ideally round bead. I've got a carved rose amethyst, and we're going to be working with a carved rose in lepidolite to demonstrate this technique today. The main materials we'll be using are obviously your bead, and then I have got an 8-inch length of 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire. So an 8-inch length will make quite a large ring, around about a size Q or a US size 8. If you want something a little bit larger than that, you may need slightly more wire, or if you're going to be making a really dainty ring, then you can probably size that down a little bit. On the day of recording, it's very, very cold here today, so I'm going to ensure that my wire is as fluid as possible. Now this again is an 8-inch length of 1.25mm gauge, which is approximately equivalent to 16 gauge. I'm working with raw copper because I just really like it. It's also very flexible once you get it nice and toasty warm. And when you hammer it, you don't have to worry about marking the surface because it's a solid metal. It's not got a coating on it. So I've gone to extra lengths to make that warm today. Now the bead I'm using today is a 14mm carved rose, and I'm using a lepidolite one today. I'm going to now use a round form to create a U shape in the very centre of that wire. Now my round form is a little smaller. It's 12.7mm, a bit like a chunky pen. And I'm going to pop that in the middle. The reason I'm not worried about it being a little smaller than the bead we're using is that heavy wire tends to spring out just a little bit. So I'm just going to cross those tails over so that we get this nice, almost like an elongated pear drop with that U shape in the middle. Just going to make sure that my bead sits in, and it does really nicely. The reason that was magically suspended is because this is a wasted bead, meaning it's got a little divot going inwards. You can see that little shape there. It's very useful for a design like this, but it doesn't matter if you're using a standard coin bead, just a round bead that is flatter, something along those lines. Now the first thing that we're going to do is to just hammer round the outer section of this rounded area. We're not going to go past, not even halfway, so less than a semicircle's worth. I'm just going to bring my hammer and block into position, and like I say, I'm not going to hammer down these lengths at all just yet. I only want to just set this form for now. So back to my standard chasing hammer today, with a solid metal like solid silver or solid copper. If you do mark the wire slightly, you can simply polish that out later. So just take your time and make sure that you're happy with how that sits. What we're looking to do is to lock in this size for now, because we're going to be using a ring mandrel to first shape this around the ring mandrel and then unshape it. So we definitely want to save that form if we're happy that our bead sits nicely in that size. You just want to make sure that that sits really neatly and doesn't deviate. If you're working with a client's size in mind, I would say add about 2 sizes to the ring stick, just to make sure that you've got enough space to work with, because this does tend to fluctuate slightly once you start adding in some weaving, and if your bead is thick like mine is, that will eat away slightly at the size of the ring if you make it exactly to size. So add perhaps 2 sizes. So in the UK, if you're making for a size Q, add 2 letters on. In the US, if you're making for a size 8, then try for a size 8.5, and then it should fit at the end of the day. So what we're going to do is just gently redefine this little pear drop shape to make sure that we're bringing those 2 edges just a little bit closer. And this is why I didn't want to hammer here just yet, because I wanted to be able to bring them slightly closer together, making this almost fish-like design. making sure that your bead still fits in the gap. You can open that out if you need to, if it's gotten a little bit tight. So because we super warmed this wire, we should be very easily able to just flatten these out slightly for the rear or underside of the ring shank. What I'm looking to do here is to bring those two wires together and then create a channel. Now, whilst we're only going to be adding wire, not beads in this today, you do want those two wires to be relatively close together and to run side by side as if they were tram or train tracks. So you can very softly just use your pliers to ensure that that little pear shape comes together neatly, and then you've got two wires that come away in a straight line. So do take your time at this stage and make sure you're happy with how it's coming together and that they will sit side by side. We're going to bring in our mandrel or ring stick next. Just going to give that a little bit of an extra warm. And I'm just going to make a random size today. But as I said earlier, aim for about 2 sizes greater than that which you will need. If you're making for a tiny finger, consider using a significantly smaller bead. This is going to be quite a big ring. This again is a 14mm carved bead, and it's a wasted bead, meaning it's got that little cinched in bit going around what would normally be the girdle of a gemstone. So let's just make sure that that's nice and smooth and warm. What we're going to do is ask quite a lot of our wire today, which is why it's really handy to have a quality wire. If you're working with a coated wire, I very highly recommend beadalon wires. They do work ever so well, and no, I don't get a kickback, and that is fine. I just love the products. So make sure that those two wires are side by side, and what we're going to do is to start by putting the head of the ring into position. So again, add 2 sizes if you are working a little bit further down the tapered end, then just add a little bit of space. So I'm going to just push that down onto that surface of the ring stick, and you'll see that that curves. Even though we've hammered this, because we've recently warmed it through, it should be accommodating. We're very slowly going to bring this around the underside of the mandrel or ring stick until it starts to come towards the rounded section. And what we're looking to do is to replicate this taper on the far side. So I'm going to push down with my thumb onto the mandrel and then draw these two wires apart so that they come around the outside of the rounded section where the bead will sit at as similar an angle as possible to the first side. So just start bringing those round, but don't start to bring them over the surface just yet. What we're looking for at this stage is to ascertain where the wires will part. Once you're happy that that fits about 2 sizes larger on your ring mandrel, just add 2 sizes. So in the US it would go from an 8 to an 8.5. So just bring those over the top until they sit around about at the midpoint on that circular section where the bead will sit. What we're going to do now is to withdraw the ring stick or mandrel for now. Have a look and make sure that they are moving around. Now when you're working with a tapered mandrel or ring stick, it's very easy for one side to be slightly larger. So I'm just going to give that a quick wiggle to make sure that they are both the same size and they are quite even in where they separate. So we're looking for symmetry there. Once we're happy with that, you've got 2 options. If you have a mandrel that you don't mind hammering on, you can pop it back onto the mandrel. If you've got a nice steel unmarked mandrel that doesn't have sizes on, you can absolutely hammer directly onto your mandrel. Not everybody has one of those. They often have a sizing mandrel or a wooden mandrel like this, but they don't have a hammering mandrel. So I'm going to show you today how you can get away without using one. So let's grab that back out of the way. What we're going to do is very gently unfold the bends that we have made, and it does need to be a soft manoeuvre so you don't put any untoward bends in the wire. I'm going to support this and start bringing those straight ends out to begin with, smoothing them through to make sure that they keep the angle, but they start to become flat in this orientation, keeping that distance as you go. So you can pinch very firmly and just unfurl the ring or the ring shank if you prefer, until you can get a flat section. Now, I'm not going to worry overly too much about this part because I've put really strong hammering just here. So I'm just going to ensure that I can get this flat. Now, it's a slow process, so take your time and just go little by little until you've brought this back to a flat piece. So I've taken my time to bring this back to a nearly flat status. It's a little bit curved, but I'm not overly worried about that. Things to look out for at this stage are that you've got those two tram lines in the centre, which will form the underside of the shank of the ring, and then that you haven't disrupted the shape of that pear drop. Make sure that your bead still fits in. If it's a little bit snug, don't worry, because we have the option to just open those tram lines out ever so slightly, which will indeed open this space as well. So the next thing we're going to do is to hammer all the way along until we get around about 1/2 inch past the angle change. We don't want to do too much just here just yet. I'm going to bring the block back in. I really do wish I could hammer that fast in real life. Once we've given that a bit of a hammer to around about 1/2 inch past the angle change, and what you may notice is that I've hammered quite firmly at this end, reasonably firmly along the shank of the ring, and then slightly more softly just here, because it gives me an option to just move those slightly should I need to. So you may have a side which is slightly prettier. For me, it'll be the side that was on the block. So I'm going to bring my mandrel back in, and we're going to start fitting that ring around the mandrel again. Even though you really have work hardened it, it's probably better to polish it at this stage if you want to, but what I'm doing is just adding a little bit of warmth. You could take a 4-sided nail file to this project if you wish to. I've got one just here. It's seen some action. You can just pop that back on the block. Give it a little bit of a polish if you have got any dinks that you don't want to see. I actually quite like to see my work in the wire, but you obviously can choose to polish that out. I'm going to put the better side upwards and start wrapping that back around the mandrel. Again, slightly larger than you actually think you will need it. So I'm going to move quite slowly because we're asking a lot of our wire today. Just pushing that softly around until it fits back to that slightly circular form where we will fit the bead in a moment. Now you may need to be quite firm just to take that arched tip over. And then I'm just going to start to form these tails of wire that have not been hammered. I'm just going to bring them around the top as if it's creating an eye form, like so. And I'm just going to leave them there for now. In a moment we will trim them to exacting lengths, so we've got a little bit of wiggle room. You don't have to have very large horns on the Hathor ring if you don't want to. You can have very tiny diminutive pieces that literally just fold over, or you can go for more large spirals if you prefer. So we can take that off the mandrel for now. And if you do need to encourage the head of the ring over slightly, you can just grip the end like so. So I'm just gripping that last little bit and giving it a very gentle encourage just to get that last arc moving around over the top of the finger like so. So let's take that back off the hand for now. We're now going to add in our second piece of wire. I'm working with a 24-inch length of 0.6mm or 22 gauge approximately wire, and this is enough for an open weave. Now you may prefer to completely fill the sides of that ring. I've gone for an open weave for a couple of reasons. Number one, I have arthritis in my wrist and lots of wire wrangling is a little bit much for me, so I've gone for an open weave. Also, the cost of wire has significantly increased. So for an open weave like this, 24 inches is plentiful. If you want to completely wrap this so that you've got a solid effect of a zigzag figure of 8 wire weave, then you absolutely can do that. You will need significantly more wire, I would say in the region of 40 to 48 inches. Let's see if that wants to stay upright. Sometimes it likes to fall over when I'm recording. Oh, I've just realised I need that. So what we're going to do is to find the approximate centre point of our finer wire, that 0.6mm. We're going to start by just laying that over the head of the ring. You can just open this out slightly if it's easier for you, and I'm going to wrap 3 times around where I will sit the bead in position, so approximately halfway across, and I'm going to wrap 3 times. So before we put the bead in, I can very easily bring the tail of the wire all the way around and just wrap 3 times around this part of the ring head. So just bring the tail up inside that semicircular form. That's a second wrap. You do want a little bit of flexibility in your finer wires, but overhandling a fine wire doesn't generally end well. It tends to get fragile. However, that 0.6 or 22 gauge is kind of on the cusp. It's strong, but it's fine. Does that make sense? I really hope so. So I'm just going to make that little section of 3 coils neat and tidy. Just bring them strongly together. And the wire that's coming off the top of the ring, that's going to go through the bead in a moment. But for right now, I'm going to bring the wire that's coming underneath and inside the head of the ring all the way up and over the top. So I'm just going to make sure that that sits neatly, like so. And then I'm going to wrap 1 time around both the semicircular form where we'll be sitting the bead and that outer section. It's coming away on the top there. So I'm going to bring that tail all the way around and up inside the head of the ring again. Bring that firmly but not too tight, because what we want to do now is to wrap 3 times around this semicircle on the head of the ring again. So if you pull really, really firmly, you'll struggle to get a nice, neat wrap inside. So again, the tail is going to come up inside the head of the ring. You can support it with your other hand like so. Wrap that all the way around and then scoot that wire up firmly against that preceding wrap. So let's just draw those wires together with the tip of your pliers. The 0.6mm 22 gauge is a little bit stronger than my nails are. Normally I would just scooch it all together with a 0.4, but we're going for strength today. So we want to keep that wire that is currently empty reasonably centralized, because we're going to be adding our bead in just a moment. But the next thing we're going to do is to go for 3 wraps around this little section, the central head of the ring. So again, bringing the tail up inside the head of the ring. That's a second wrap, and again you can use your pliers just to poot that over. These are not technical terms. Then we'll go for a 3rd wrap, bring the tail up inside the head of the ring once more, just guiding it with my non-dominant hand so that I don't put any stress in the wire. Bringing that all together again with a little scooch. It feels very different to working with 0.4, but we're looking for longevity, so we've gone for the 0.6 or 22 gauge today. So I'm going to go for 1 more wrap around both of these items, and you can go for as many as you desire, but what we're looking to do is find an exit point so we can start weaving across the side of, or the wings of the ring, whichever you prefer to know it as. So I think we'll go for a wrap around both the outer section and the inner section of the head of the ring. So I'm going to bring that tail up inside the head of the ring, pull that all the way around, scoot that wire up neatly, and then I'll go for 3 wraps around just the inner segment, and then we'll wrap the 2 pieces together again. So just make sure that's neat as you go. Bring the tip up inside, all the way around, scoot that down if it gets out of control. You can, if you feel that you're going to make the ring go wonky, pop it onto the mandrel. Just make sure that you're keeping everything good and solid. So if you do pull that a little bit hard and misshape it, you can rescue that. One of the reasons that we give it a hammer to here but not past is so that this can be flexible. So if you do scooch it out of position, just pop it back onto the mandrel and you'll be able to rescue that in no time at all. So I'm going to wrap 3 times around the inner circuit that forms the central head of the ring. Now you can, if you want to, work with an even heavier wire. You could go for a 1.5 or 1.6 gauge, which is approximately equivalent to a 14 gauge wire. It takes some wrangling, which I've not got in me today, so I've gone for the 1.25 or 16 gauge. So let's just bring that back into position, and then I'm going to take that all the way around. Now when I bring the wire back inside the ring, this time I'm just going to take it to the shoulder of the ring. So let's just bring that wire up inside the shoulder, not inside the center of the head, but inside the upper shoulder. It's looking like a split shank at the moment. Pull that firmly into position, but don't knacker your ring, obviously. And then I'm going to wrap 3 times around just that shoulder. And then at that point, we can start to weave the ring sides or shoulders with whatever type of weave formation you like. So I've got 3 visible wraps on the upper shoulder at the moment, and the wires coming underneath. So what I would classically do is bring this over to the other side, the lower shoulder as you're looking on screen now, take that over the top and then wrap 3 times so that I could complete a figure of 8 weave. If you don't know how to do a figure of 8 weave, I have a dedicated video that you can watch just here. Be cautious that you don't mal-shape your ring whilst you're just pulling this into position, just giving that a bit of a wiggle to get a tiny bit of tension. Now before I continue with the weave down the shoulder of the ring, what I want to do is get that wire out of the way, set the bead in the centre of the ring, and if you have pulled it out of shape, just pop it back onto the mandrel for a second. You'll find that it really does come back to true quite simply. You may need to scoot those wraps over. Let's find that bead, which will undoubtedly make that fall over. So I'm taking the wire now that comes off the top of the head of the ring. I'm going to add my bead. Finding the bead hole is always the most joyful part for me. Allow that to sit into position and just get it. If it's a wasted bead like mine is, you'll need to wriggle it into position. If it's a standard coin bead, it will just sit where you need it to sit. So I'm going to copy that exact same technique, and that will begin with 3 wraps around what is now the upper head of the ring, and then 1 wrap around both the outer wire and the inner wire, which is the head of the ring. And then I will continue in that same weave until I've got 3 wraps around the inner, 1 wrap around both, and you'll need to do that 3 times so that you've got 3 wraps around both wires, exactly the same as we have here on the now lower side of the ring. And then I will meet you back in just a moment to move on to the next stage of today's masterclass. Now when you get to the 3rd wrap around both the inner head of the ring and that outer wire, we're going to bring that tail up inside the shoulder exactly the same way as we have done previously, but instead of continuing to wrap along the outer wire, this time we're going to wrap 3 times around the inner wire before beginning that figure of 8 weave. So just pull that tail across, so we're wrapping 3 times around that inner wire, bringing the tail up inside the shank exactly the same way as before. So that's 2 wraps, and then that 3rd wrap. You can pop this back on the mandrel anytime you need to. Tighten up those little wraps. I'm just going to push across the sides of the wire like so that we can tighten up those 3 wraps. And because that wire is now coming up inside that shoulder, see that's coming up inside there, what we'll need to do is take it over the top of the lower wire. Now we're not going to go to the outer wire, we're going to go to that inner wire that's literally on the shoulder there. So over the top, straight line as we can to make that nice and firm, and then we're going to wrap 3 times around the lower shoulder. So let's bring that wire up inside that shoulder. You can just very cautiously protect that into position. and then wrap 3 times and go on your merry way with that figure of 8 weave. So you can, as I mentioned earlier, go for a really open weave, as I have done on this example, or you can add that extra wire, say 40 to 48 inches, give your fingers a workout, and fill this with a beautiful figure of 8 weave. As you start to move through that figure of 8 weave, just going backwards and forwards between those 2 wires that lead to the shank of the ring, you do have a moment to just check the size of your ring and to make sure that these little wraps are radiating evenly. So you can adjust them if you need to with your pliers. Just make sure everything's nice and neat and tidy and taut. Let's just give that a little bit of a pinch. And at this stage, you've got a little bit of wiggle room on the sizing. So you can just pop that back onto the mandrel and make sure it's going to fit. As you can see, this is quite a deep waisted bead. So it will take a little bit of the size of the ring away. So that's now about 2 sizes smaller than we started. So you will continue to weave all the way around, and then you can meet at some point in the back. Now what I find is that it's much easier to meet slightly to one side than dead in the middle on the bottom. Let me just show you the meeting point on this ring, which is just here. So you'll see that there is a break in the wire, not a physical break, but there's a gap where one end ends and the other end ends, and you can just bring them quite close together, but it's often slightly more comfortable to have that on the side. Now what you would want to do is to cut that wire flush with the outside so that you can give that a really firm squish and make it sit really neatly so that there's no risk to other things, but also the most important thing is that it's comfortable. So do test your rings if you're making for other people to make sure that there's no snag points, there's no damage to the body as well as to clothing. So I'm going to continue with my figure of 8 weaving, and I will finish on whichever side has got slightly less wire will be the side that I get closer to. It doesn't need to be too dramatic. You can just take it just slightly to one side. It's easier if you do that. If you are going to completely fill that with weaving, I wish you all the very best of luck. So once you get down towards that joining point, just make sure that everything is sitting evenly. We can cut those in just a second. Just make sure that everything's nice and neat and tidy. We're going to finish off with 3 wraps on the opposite side to where the other end has finished up. So that's 1. And you can make a little needle just by pushing the end over. Makes it a little bit easier to get up into that tight gap, just like so. And then we've got 1 more wrap to complete the section. So just bring that last little bit of wire through. It's done some work, so it's a little bit tense at this stage. Make sure that everything is super neat and tidy. And then you can either bring that wire through. There's a technique where you can wiggle the wire so that it snaps. My preference has always been to go in with the flush side of your cutters and get as close as you can to that truncation point, and then just make sure that that sits snugly against the rest of that coil, and in that way there won't be anything to touch the skin. So we're going to finish off the ring now. Again, you can pop that back onto your mandrel if you're making for a client and you have a specific size in mind. We're just going to centralize those 2 bars that are coming away from the head of the ring. Make sure that your bead is centralized and that you're happy with how that sits. And then we're going to trim these to the same length with a nice flush cut. So the only reason I put my finger in the danger zone is so that I can ensure it doesn't ping the end of the wire that I'm trimming away off, and into the camera. It only happened once, but I don't want it to happen again. So once I'm happy, everything is nice and neat, and we've got that figure of 8 weaving on either side of the head of the ring, just onto those shoulders, I'm going to add some spirals. Now you can make these as large or as small as you like. The idea behind calling it the Hathor ring is just that's what it reminded me of. Reminded me of the Hathor goddess. So I'm going to pop the very tip of my round nose pliers in and just start circling that wire away. Now it's seen some action today, so just be gentle with yourself and the wire to make sure that you don't overly rush anything. Now you can leave that slightly longer and curl it down over the side of the finger if you prefer that aesthetic. The risk there is that it could catch on other rings, or you can continue to coil and bring that slightly closer up. Now if you're very, very careful, you can pop that onto a block and just strike down to give that a little bit of hammering. So you have options with how to finish the Hathor ring. So there you have today's full and complete masterclass project for the Hathor Wire Wrap Ring. My name is Gem Hawks. I hope that you're enjoying the content. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, drop me a hype, and also ask in the comments if there's something you wish to see in a future tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.